Hi, everybody. I'm Madi. I am a senior data scientist at Slalom, and that's a consulting company. A data science consultant is a little bit different than a normal data scientist because we're frequently working with small to medium-sized companies who don't have a data science team, and they are looking to dip their toes into the data science world, or companies who have maybe a data science team that's super busy and they hire us to take on some of the work that they don't have time for, or on the rare occasion, giant data science teams that have huge MLOps operations that are going crazy, and we're brought in to help smooth out some of those pipelines. So we really touch a lot of different aspects of data science, and our day is different from one day to the next. As a data science leader at Slalom, what my day usually looks like is talking to a lot of non-technical stakeholders and trying to identify whether or not the challenge that they want solved is appropriate for data science. So I'm here to give you a non-technical talk at the end of a technical day about workshops. And so thank you for having me and having this non-technical talk, and thank you for letting me title it with the 25-year-old pop culture reference. So today I'm going to talk about just first of all why to use workshops, and then spend most of the talk about the different types of workshops that are in my workshop tool belt. There was an earlier talk this morning that was about that had the nice slide that whenever you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's kind of true for workshops for me. Whenever I am faced with a challenge, I always want to throw a workshop at it. It's hard for me not to do that, but I have found these 4 types of workshops fairly valuable, so I'm going to talk through each one of those. And then lastly, I want to close with some facilitation tips. We are technical folks, and we tend to oftentimes hide behind our computers and don't like interacting with normal people all the time. So these facilitation tips will hopefully come in handy in case you do find yourself leading a conversation of non-technical folks in the future. Okay, so let's start with why workshops. The challenge that I see frequently is that our data science teams your time is super limited. You're getting asked by everybody and their mother to do some sort of data science or AI or machine learning, or my favorite quote from an executive is oftentimes, just can't we throw AI at it and solve this problem? Sure, yeah, probably, but there's a lot of questions that I want that executive to answer to me before I decide that this is the appropriate tactic. Oftentimes they don't know what they're talking about. Everybody has heard about generative AI. Like, I think half the conversations at this conference have been about generative AI, so our executives are also getting really excited about generative AI, and they think that that might be the right approach to their problem, when really they're just talking about automation or something, maybe like a rules-based approach that could solve their problem easier than implementing an AI, ML, or generative AI application. So in a nutshell, our approach is to talk about their challenge. What is the challenge that you're trying to solve? Identify the value of solving that problem, and then evaluate the effort. How much is it going to take to actually build out a solution that addresses the challenge? And then ideally, if you've got a ton of these different ROIs and evaluations of efforts, you create a backlog prioritized by the most valuable and down to the least, and the least effort down to the least. And so what I'm going to talk through in these next 4 workshops is how to get to this last step here. So you'll see these 2 things again later on in the presentation. So, all right, let's talk about the different types of workshops that we've found value in. The first is kind of a workshop. It's the DS Roadshow. That is useful when you are kind of selling the idea of data science or AI to folks, getting them comfortable with talking about the language that we use, but really not getting closer to that goal of solving a problem, just more of an explanatory conversation. The next is use case ideation. So they've got an idea of what that might be, but they need help brainstorming. They need help thinking how data science might actually solve that problem. Next is prioritization. They got a list of ideas. They need help to identify which one is the most valuable to tackle. And then lastly is the requirements workshop. So that one is you going deep into one particular idea, pulling out all the information that you need in order to develop a solution around it. So let's start with the DS Roadshow. I've got workshops in parentheses here because it's not really a workshop, it's more of a presentation. You are spending a lot of time creating content around any number of different ideas, some of which may be here. An overview of what the heck AI ML actually is, maybe some industry trends, what a DS project looks like. Oftentimes they have no idea that it takes 8 to 10 weeks to just build out a POC and 6 to 10 months or longer to actually deploy it. So having that information is very, very useful. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have been asked to give a version of this talk specific to generative AI to their executives because they're all asking you, what is this and can I start using it? If you haven't been asked to do that, I'm sure it'll be soon. Some of these topics may be valuable to have them aware of so that the next time they come to ask you, can we use AI to solve this? They'll already be thinking about, okay, maybe that we need to think about the security and risk associated with this before we bring generative AI into the conversation. Beyond the roadshow is where we actually get more interactive. So this first one is the use case ideation workshop. So the goal of this one is to inspire non-technical people who are not usually thinking about data science in their day-to-day to start thinking about how data science, AI, machine learning might actually solve the challenges that they face. It's usually pretty fun. It's a lot of brainstorming, a lot of ideation. Often it's like sky is blue type of ideation where you're not closing off any ideas. It's all generally like people are pretty happy and positive coming out of these. Here's a sample agenda that I use to frame my workshops. The first part is the intros, where your executive sponsor might stand up in front of everybody and tell them why they're here, why this is important to talk about, what they're expecting out of this. Participants who may not have an understanding of AI or maybe want to demonstrate their understanding of AI will talk about what they want to learn, and then you as a facilitator are explaining who you are, why you're there, and what you're helping to get them to share out of the conversation. Oftentimes we'll do a little bit of an AI ML overview just to get everybody on the same page of using the same information, that they're sharing the same terminologies and information. And then we get into the meat of the actual discussion, which is the business challenge brainstorm, which is the first part. So focusing on the challenges that they're facing, where are the pain points, where are they seeing a lot of struggle, and we like to ground it in those challenges first so that you're not just throwing out random ideas that don't actually track back to the core business function of the organization. After that, we talk about what solutions might actually be relevant. So sometimes the team with a non-technical team might not have all the solutions, so it might be an opportunity for you as a facilitator to jump in a little bit more and share your expertise, but oftentimes they do have great ideas. They might not know the words for it, but they might say, oh, it would be really cool to be able to predict when this customer might churn. And you could be like, oh, I know exactly how to solve that. We'll put that on the board. And then lastly, to wrap up, talk about what your the summary of the conversations. If you've been able to talk about the priority project, if one has really jumped out to the top as like, oh yeah, this is the problem we got to solve, get into more detail about that. And then segue into a prioritization workshop, which we'll talk about more in a minute. So what makes a good business challenge? So on the bottom here is a screenshot of a Miro board that we use to facilitate a virtual workshop. We typically like to do these in person because it's a lot easier to get people participating, and you can see whether or not attention is waning or if people are really motivated by a particular topic. But there's virtual options as well. We use Miro, and these 4 boxes here are the KPIs that functional group was focused on. It was a training org in this instance, so they really cared about operational efficiency, capacity planning, and quality of service. So we had them brainstorm business challenges related to those KPIs. So a good business challenge is one that is measurable and that you might be able to actually relate back to a core KPI or however the organization is being measured. And how about a solution? So the second half of the workshop, we pull across, again, this is Miro, we pull across some of the challenges and identify some solutions that might address those challenges. A good solution addresses a business challenge. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It could be automation, it could be AI, it could be ML. We're not asking them to limit themselves to data science solutions in this, even though it's labeled as a data science workshop. Sometimes you'll find that the solution is building a data warehouse because they just need better data governance or better, easier access to their data. They don't even need machine learning, and that's a perfectly acceptable solution here. And the rest of your data team would probably be very excited to hear that that is something that the business finds value in now that you've done this workshop. All right, the prioritization workshop. So oftentimes I'll squish these two together and have a very long afternoon of workshopping where the first half has got everybody. The second half might be cordoned down to a subset of people, maybe just the executive sponsor and a few different business and technical leads. But what this goal of this type of workshop is to take all of those ideas, ideally you have like 30 or 40 different ideas that people have thrown on the board, and prioritize them and come out with something that may look a little bit like this on the left here of identifying the highest value, easiest to implement options. Here's, again, a sample agenda for what that workshop may look like. If you're not doing it directly dovetailed with the ideation workshop, you can start with another intro where we're reviewing the challenges that we're trying to solve and explain a little bit of the scoring metrics. Then go through the actual scoring. I've got some pretty squishy timelines here for the agenda because if you're dealing with 30 or 40 use cases, you might want to spend that much time with a very small group of people. If there's only a handful, you don't need a lot of time. I would not recommend doing a 3-hour workshop with 40 people trying to prioritize something like this because that ends up being a whole lot of different opinions and you'll get bogged down on 1 or 2 different use cases and not really get to your goal of evaluating or prioritizing all of these different use cases. So how do you actually do the impact scoring? This is our rubric that we use to help identify the impact. So each of these are just super basic, low, medium, high, small, medium, large t-shirt sizes of the impact. It's not going into a lot of detail about what the actual impact. We're not trying to calculate any ROI. It's really just a rough business impact scoring so that we can quickly slap a label on it and keep moving. This I oftentimes flash on the screen at the beginning of the workshop to just talk about what it is we're thinking about holding in the back of our brains as we're giving it the business impact. But the true details are not super important because you get into more of that impact in the next workshop. But really, it's just the t-shirt size, the estimate here that we're going for. Again, for data readiness, this is the slide that we flashed on the screen as we're explaining it. Sometimes there's something that your team is really, really excited about, but the data lives in spreadsheets, or the data doesn't exist because you need to go out there and conduct some experiments. So that would be a very low data readiness. The data is not available or unreliable. But if the data is like perfectly modeled in this beautiful snowflake table and it's updated regularly and you trust the source, that would be high. You'd rate that very high. Depending on the challenges that you're facing, some of these may or may not be relevant to representative and not biased data, whether or not it's secure, and if you've collected it responsibly are things to keep in mind as well. Complexity scoring. This is the third and final metric for our prioritization. And these are my rough back-of-the-envelope t-shirt sizes on the left-hand side again. With non-technical stakeholders, they may not know the difference between AI, machine learning, statistics, descriptive analytics, or any of that. So it helps to ground them with something like this that just kind of gives the layman's version of what each of these things are, and then walking them through what that might equate to from the t-shirt size, complexity. You may notice I've lumped machine learning and GenAI together. I know that GenAI is arguably a lot easier to build a prompt around, but the LLM ops, or whatever it is we're calling it, is super hard to manage generative AI in production, so I'm keeping it on that same level for now until the industry proves me otherwise. The highest one, which oftentimes is like where the conversation starts with our executives, is we just want the data to automatically do X, Y, Z, or we want to build a digital twin that simulates our factory floor and we'll be able to automatically adjust parameters and see how that'll change. That's pretty complex, and they oftentimes don't understand that takes a lot of work to build up to that solution as opposed to just running a descriptive or a predictive analytics system. So the deliverables from this workshop are oftentimes this prioritization matrix, which I flashed on the screen over here earlier, which is a nice visual But ideally, you've got your prioritized backlog coming out of this. So you've got your list of all the different use cases, and the top one being the one that you want to tackle first, or have a team to help tackle subsequent ones. And then the next time an idea comes in, you can fit it into the backlog by identifying how it ranks on these 3 different metrics. Okay. Last different workshop type that we've found value with is the requirements gathering workshop. So after you've identified a couple of different use cases that really seem to show a lot of value, and you want to figure out how to start thinking about tackling it, this one is meant for really just that executive sponsor or like the business lead that has brought this use case to you, your data team that are responsible for knowing where all the bodies are buried amongst your data systems, and you to help facilitate this conversation. Here's a sample agenda again. This one's a little bit shorter than the last ones and can flex out or flex in depending on how many use cases you're doing. I think with about an hour and a half, we got through 3 of them with a team of 6 or 7 that were helping or that were providing us answers. So make sure that this might seem like a lot of time to get through a workshop and pull out that information, but it tends to go quickly. But the main tool that I use in a requirements gathering workshop is this opportunity canvas, and I've pulled this from another consulting company out there, which is not targeted towards data science, but helps you ask some of the core questions that you might need to get answered in order to build out your solution. So on the left-hand side, this red box is factual information. Your executive sponsors or the other people in the room should have the answers to those questions. Who is the user that is going to be using this tool? If it's just like 3 or 4 people that are using this to solve a problem that they spend half an hour on, hopefully that has already been filtered out prior to getting to this point in your previous prioritization workshop. But if it hasn't, that'll come out here too. If it's really clear that this is a tool for a small handful of people and it's not going to move the needle very much, you'll identify that with this by looking at both the users and the business challenge that they're looking to solve. In the middle section is the solution idea. A lot of this information you'll have already pulled out during your use case ideation workshop, so you can just copy and paste it in rather than asking them the same question about it again. But it's another opportunity to ask a few more questions, poke a few more holes into the solution that you guys have identified. Think about what it might actually look like in production if you were to build that out. And then like this, I can't say enough about this little box down at the bottom. What is the budget? Do they really have the time and the money to invest in this type of solution, knowing that you are an expensive resource and that it takes a while to solve these? Is there the budget there? Oftentimes they haven't thought about that prior to coming to you, so explicitly asking that is a helpful conversation point. And then lastly, in this green section, you may not have the answers to these already. These are more of like an idea of what you would like to be measuring or to be including as the solution rolls out. But the user metrics section, or the metrics section, I think is the most important one to ask questions about. Is not only are we looking at accuracy, precision, recall, like our traditional data science metrics of what constitutes success, but what are the business metrics that they have in their heads that would constitute a successful rollout of this product? We use this on a generative AI knowledge management chatbot project, and the metrics that we had were like, how frequently does the chatbot return the right answer to the user? And that's a great metric to quantify as a data science team. But what they really cared about is like, how much time does our IT team spend on tackling tier 3 IT tickets, and does this chatbot reduce the amount of time that they're spending on that? They didn't have any data on how long it takes to tackle these products, tier 3 projects right now, so that we couldn't include that as a metric. It was an ideal metric that they wanted to measure at some point down the line, but it would have been really valuable to know ahead of time prior to tackling this project whether or not we could include that. So including both technical metrics and business metrics in that last section. The green section here is important. I won't spend any time on this, but if you've got time with your data leads, these are the types of questions you want to ask and qualify about the data sources themselves. If you are trying to run any sort of like cloud computing cost calculator, this is really helpful to have, knowing how much data there is, how frequently the refresh cadence is and whatnot, because that'll help you with those calculation estimates. And again, going back to that budget question. The post-workshop deliverables for this style of workshop is a project plan. So this is like an example Gantt chart of what came out, estimating what they wanted to do in that time period. We had a rough idea of what we thought it took to build that out. And then likely an architecture diagram of what of the services that be required that they don't already have them stood up that would need to be stood up in order to solve it. All right, I got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to close with some facilitation tips. If you find yourself facilitating a workshop, it's easy to default to the public speaking persona where you are the expert and you are presenting out on a specific topic and people are there to hear what you have to say. That is not the goal of a workshop. The goal is actually to be a facilitator. So facilitating lots of back and forth communication, creating a space where folks feel comfortable sharing when they have a question or when they aren't sure about the right answer or not. And it's very improvisational. It's not rehearsed necessarily. It's rehearsed to the extent that like you know who's going to be talking to what, but if the conversation starts going all the way down in this direction, you have to be ready to like either let it go that direction or bring it back to the points that you want to cover. So it's also quite different than a trainer who is also facilitating two-way conversation, but mostly in the question and answer response way, and not of a more of an improvisational type of way. So if you're facilitating a workshop, please keep these things in mind. You want to build rapport with your audience. You want to make sure that they are comfortable with the space and know that you are supportive or willing to answer any of the questions that come up. You want to keep it as interactive as possible. I had screenshots there of the Miro boards that we use to have people like moving their answers around. I like to start it with a little icebreaker question, like where do you want to go to travel someday? Just to get them comfortable with the tool and familiar with like the space and making it feel light and fun as opposed to like a test. Establish ground rules. I forgot to do this once where we just kicked it off and it kind of went off the rails because people were on their phones or they weren't paying attention or they weren't really respecting each other in the way that I would like them to have. So just like at the beginning of the session, if you state, hey, we're all here, we've got our phones on silent, we're just going to spend the hour together and establish any other ground rules like whatever stays in this room is conferred in this room stays in this room, Vegas rules, what have you. Those are good to set at the beginning. The 6-second rule, this one has been the hardest for me. When you ask a question, especially for a non-technical audience, a technical question of a non-technical audience, they're not going to raise their hands right away. They're not going to jump in right away. So being comfortable in that silence and just kind of sitting and waiting for people to respond to your question is uncomfortable, but sometimes really valuable in encouraging other people to fill that void or answer your question. Scheduling breaks. 3 hours is a long time to be sitting down with anybody in a group. So make sure that you've got time for them to go off, take bio breaks, or check their email, or do whatever it is they're going to do when it's not paying attention to the main audience, main core outcomes. And it gives you time to like rejigger your approach too if needed. If you're falling super flat, or if you're going too fast or too slow, it's an opportunity for you to like come back, take a look at what you're trying to accomplish and revise as needed. And then lastly, the parking lot. There's always somebody who wants to talk about their pet project or their pet idea or whatever it is that is only marginally relevant to what it is you're trying to do. So having a parking lot and very politely saying, okay, that's a great idea, I'm writing it down right here. We're going to come back to it either at the end of this workshop or we'll touch base one-on-one later about this, is a good way to help to rein them in a little bit and keep moving. So that is it. I love dealing with these workshops. So if you guys have any questions about workshops at your own organizations or want to chat about really anything else about working with non-technical people, now's the time to ask some questions. Thanks.
If you've ever worked with like a really small business that is almost like afraid of learning how to use data, like how do you bridge that gap between not using data to here are some simple ways we can use it effectively?
I don't know if I've ever actually been in that situation. Usually if they're approaching a data science team, they're either like caught up in the hype wave of AI and data science, or know that they should be using it and want to think about it. Sometimes participants will be a little bit more skeptical because they don't want AI stealing their jobs, or for whatever, a host of other reasons. So I think we try to address those head on. Like, AI is not coming to steal your job. It's still like, even generative AI, as fantastic as it is, for those of you that were in this last session, we heard about how incredible the advances have been in that space. It's still not as good as a human in a lot of cases. So trying to identify what their concerns are and helping to address them is really the only advice I have.
Hi, what are some of the challenges that you face while you're facilitating these workshops? Especially, like, I can imagine if you're in a room full of executives, there's like egos per se involved.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the challenges that I have definitely faced and have tried to fix over time is not giving enough time for these sessions. I feel like we can rapid fire get through all of these, but people always want to talk about their project or demonstrate their expertise, or things go off in a tangent frequently. So I think trying to get too much done too quickly, like if an executive only has half an hour, they might try to push you into squeezing it into a half an hour, but it's oftentimes not enough time to get to where you need, and then you'll have to go back and revisit a lot of that stuff again.
Thank you. Have you run into situations where there were executives came that we only need the requirements workshop, we are ready with what we have, and you might have faced situation that there are some checkpoints that no, this does not need requirements.
Yes.
But starting from use case and prioritization.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially last fall when the GenAI hype wave, I feel like, was cresting. There was oftentimes the ideas would come in prior to going through any of that other stuff, and we would go through the motions of asking all the questions in the opportunity canvas, only to realize, like, the example that comes to mind is generative AI for data insights. The data team wanted to be able to automatically generate data insights. So we go through all of these questions, and like, really, the data team is 2 people, and generative AI is not really there yet to be able to like automatically create those insights. So that workshop was a failure, and we didn't end up building anything, and we didn't end up solving any problems. But we got to validate that project was probably not the right project. So maybe it was a success.
One last question.
Maybe a little bit similar, and you've addressed it a bit, but how do you deal with unrealistic expectations, especially from maybe non-technical people that have read a lot of things on Twitter?
Do you mean like AI is going to solve all your problems type of thing? I think if you have an opportunity to ask some of those like second layer deep questions on what it is they're trying to solve, and you explain the limitations of the technology today, that's as close as you're going to get. But yeah, there's definitely still that air of like, yeah, just throw AI at it. And I don't know if that's going to go away, but hopefully with some of these tools in your tool belt, you can ask the right questions.
Thank you so much for that talk. I know some of you had questions for her. I'd request you to connect with her offline or after this talk. But thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks, everyone.